It was a Thursday, March 14th, 2002, in Cedar Falls, a quiet suburban enclave nestled in the rolling hills of northern Oregon. The kind of community where neighbors still borrowed sugar without asking, where children rode their bicycles until streetlights flickered on, and where the most exciting news was usually about the annual Harvest Festival or someone's prize-winning garden at the county fair. Cedar Falls was the epitome of American small-town safety, a place where parents felt comfortable letting their kids walk to school alone, and where the biggest crime in recent memory had been someone stealing lawn decorations from the Hendersons' front yard. Until darkness crept in where it didn't belong, shattering the illusion of security that had wrapped around this peaceful community like a comfortable blanket. Sophia Martinez, age 11, had just completed another ordinary day at Willow Creek Elementary School at exactly 3:08 p.m. The security cameras positioned at various points around the campus captured her final moments on school property with crystal clarity, a bright-eyed girl with shoulder-length curly brown hair that caught the afternoon sunlight, wearing her favorite lavender sweater that her grandmother had knitted the previous Christmas, and carrying a mint green backpack adorned with 4 small plush keychains that jingled softly as she walked. She hugged her best friend Jessica goodbye at the main entrance, their conversation animated as they discussed plans for the upcoming weekend sleepover at Jessica's house. That cheerful wave at the school gates, captured in grainy black and white footage, would haunt everyone who saw it in the days that followed. The Martinez household sat exactly 7 blocks from Willow Creek Elementary, a pleasant 12-minute stroll through tree-lined sidewalks that Sophia had walked hundreds of times before. The route was as familiar to her as the back of her own hand. Past the Thompsons' house with a red mailbox shaped like a barn, around the corner where old Mr. Peterson always sat on his porch reading the newspaper, down Maple Ridge Boulevard with its canopy of ancient oak trees that created natural shade even on the hottest summer days. And finally onto Sunnyside Drive, where her modest 2-story home waited with its cheerful yellow shutters and flower boxes that Carmen tended with meticulous care. But on this particular Thursday afternoon, March 14th, 2002, Sophia Martinez never made it home. By 3:50 p.m., her mother, Carmen Martinez, had already traced a familiar route twice, her anxiety building with each step. Carmen was a creature of habit herself, and she knew her daughter's patterns better than anyone. Sophia was never late, never deviated from her established path, never stopped to chat with strangers or linger at store windows. The first time Carmen walked the route, she convinced herself that perhaps Sophia had forgotten something at school and gone back to retrieve it. The second time, doubt began to creep in like ice water in her veins. By 4:45 p.m., she was on the phone with the school office, her voice tight with worry as she spoke to Mrs. Patterson, the receptionist who had known Sophia since kindergarten. Carmen hoped against hope that her daughter had stayed behind for some forgotten activity, maybe helping a teacher clean up after an art project or assisting the library, as she sometimes did. By 5:15 p.m., when her trembling fingers dialed 911, Carmen Martinez knew with absolute certainty that something terrible had happened to her daughter. And by 6:30 p.m., Willow Creek Elementary was bathed in the harsh, unforgiving glow of emergency vehicle lights, transforming the peaceful campus into a scene from every parent's worst nightmare. Carmen Martinez was 36 years old, a dedicated physical therapist who ran a small practice in her home office and had raised Sophia alone since her husband's deployment overseas 3 years earlier. Miguel Martinez was serving his second tour of duty in Afghanistan, and the separation had been difficult for both mother and daughter, though they spoke to him via video calls every Sunday evening without fail. Carmen described her daughter to the responding officers as introspective, imaginative, and wise beyond her chronological age. Sophia had always been an old soul, preferring books to television, art projects to video games, and quiet conversations with adults to the loud, chaotic play that seemed to define most children her age. No behavioral problems had ever surfaced at school or home, no academic struggles despite the challenges of having an absent father, no family conflicts that might explain a sudden desire to run away. Simply a girl who adored wildlife photography, charcoal sketching, and mystery novels that she checked out from the library by the armload, often finishing 3 or 4 books per week during summer vacation. "She always comes directly home," Carmen insisted to the responding officers, her voice cracking with emotion as she wrung her hands in her lap. No detours, no spontaneous visits to friend houses, No stopping at the corner store for candy. She finds comfort in predictability and routine. It makes her feel secure, especially with her father being so far away. The officers took detailed notes, asking about family disputes, recent changes in behavior, new people in Sophia's life, anyone who might have shown unusual interest in the girl. Carmen answered every question thoroughly, but her responses painted a picture of a perfectly normal, well-adjusted child with no reason to disappear voluntarily and no obvious enemies or threats in her carefully structured world. Law enforcement initiated comprehensive search procedures immediately, treating the disappearance with the urgency that every missing child case demanded. They methodically examined every inch of the 7-block corridor between Willow Creek Elementary and the Martinez residence, looking for any sign that Sophia had passed through: a dropped school paper, a footprint in soft soil, a witness who might have seen her walking. Tracking dogs were deployed, their handlers working the animals along the established route, while the German Shepherd sniffed frantically for any trace of Sophia's scent. Helicopter surveillance crews circled overhead, their powerful searchlights sweeping back and forth across the neighborhood as darkness fell. Community volunteers, drawn by news reports and social media posts, joined the search effort, combing through wooded recreational areas, checking behind dumpsters and storage sheds, calling Sophia's name until their voices grew hoarse. Dozens of uniformed officers worked in organized grid patterns, leaving no stone unturned, no potential hiding place unexplored. The result was absolutely nothing. After 6 hours of intensive searching involving over 50 people and thousands of dollars worth of equipment and resources, they had found no trace of Sophia Martinez. She had disappeared without creating any disturbance, without any eyewitnesses, and without leaving behind a single clue that might indicate what had happened to her or where she had gone. It was as if the 11-year-old girl had simply evaporated into thin air somewhere between the school gates and her front door. The search continued through the night and into the following day, but hope was beginning to fade among both the professional searchers and the volunteers who had given up their time to help find a missing child. Until Carmen Martinez examined her daughter's art portfolio. Hidden within Sophia's extensive sketch collection, which she kept organized in a large 3-ring binder with plastic protective sleeves, Carmen discovered something that made her blood run cold and her hands shake uncontrollably. Page after page featured the same deeply disturbing image: a tall figure draped in a lengthy dark overcoat that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The figure stood perfectly still and straight, with shoulders that appeared unnaturally broad and arms that hung at unnatural angles. Most unsettling of all, the face was completely absent, not obscured by shadow or turned away, but literally empty, just a blank oval where features should have been, as if someone had erased a person's identity while leaving their physical form intact. In the bottom corner of each drawing, scratched in graphite pencil with the careful attention to detail that characterized all of Sophia's artwork, the mysterious figure stood motionless beside a cluster of oak trees that Carmen recognized immediately. They were the same oak trees that lined Maple Ridge Boulevard, the trees that Sophia passed under every single day on her walk home from school. The caption beneath each sketch read exactly the same every time, written in Sophia's neat cursive handwriting: every Thursday. Carmen flipped through the pages with growing horror, counting 15 separate drawings of the same scene, all created over the past 3 weeks, all showing the faceless man in the same position, at the same location, on the same day of the week. Detective Laura Chin was assigned to lead the investigation that very evening, receiving the call at her home just as she was sitting down to dinner with her own family. With 14 years of experience in the county Special Victims Unit, she had handled countless domestic violence cases, teenage runaways who usually turned up within 48 hours, and 3 previous child abduction attempts, all successfully resolved with the children returned safely to their families. But something about this situation felt fundamentally different from her previous cases, a nagging sense that they were dealing with something far more sinister than a typical missing child report. Carmen handed over the sketch portfolio with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, her wedding ring clicking against the metal binder rings as she struggled to maintain her composure. Maybe it's just her imagination running wild, Detective Chin said initially, try to offer some measure of reassurance to the distraught mother while privately feeling deeply troubled by what she was seeing. You know how creative children can be, especially artistic ones like Sophia. Sometimes they create elaborate fantasy worlds that seem very real to them. Carmen shook her head firmly, her dark eyes filled with certainty and fear. She began drawing him exactly 3 weeks ago, right after the first Thursday in March. Always identical images. Same man, same coat, same empty face, same location. She's never been one for fantasy or make-believe. Detective Chun. Sophia draws what she sees, not what she imagines. The detective continued flipping to the portfolio, noting the consistency of the images, the careful attention to detail in the background elements, the way the lighting and shadows were rendered with mathematical precision that suggested observation rather than imagination. Sophia had never mentioned encountering anyone suspicious during her daily walks home from school, never complained about feeling watched or followed, never asked to be picked up instead of walking alone. Yet page after page revealed the same haunting image, a towering figure positioned between two massive oak trees at the sidewalk's edge near Maple Ridge Boulevard, precisely halfway along her established route between school and home. The figure consistently observed from a distance, never approached or interacted, never pursued or threatened, simply stood there watching with that terrible blank face, as if cataloging every movement of every child who passed by. Then Detective Chin noticed something else that made her stomach drop and her professional instincts scream warnings. On the final page of sketches, different from all the others, Sophia had written a single, chilling question in careful block letters. What's inside the dark blue car? Police immediately requested footage from the 3 nearby traffic monitoring cameras that covered different sections of Sophia's walking route. One camera was positioned directly at Willow Creek Elementary's main entrance, providing clear views of students arriving and departing each day. Another faced the busy intersection of Maple Ridge and Sunnyside Drive, where several residential streets converged near a small shopping plaza. A third monitored the community center parking lot, which bordered the wooded area where some of the search efforts had been concentrated. The school entrance footage clearly documented Sophia's departure at 3:08 p.m., showing her in perfect detail as she hugged Jessica goodbye and waved cheerfully before walking out of camera range. But the Maple Ridge camera, which should have captured Sophia as she passed the intersection where the mysterious figure had been drawn, presented a disturbing and highly suspicious anomaly. According to detailed maintenance records kept by the city's technology department, the camera had experienced what appeared to be a sudden, inexplicable malfunction. The timestamp showed continuous recording throughout the afternoon until exactly 3:11 p.m., followed by 12 minutes of complete static interference and electronic snow, then normal operation mysteriously resuming at 3:23 p.m. based on Sophia's typical walking pace, which Carmen had timed on numerous occasions. She would have passed that exact intersection around 3:13 p.m., right in the middle of the technical malfunction. Detective Chin immediately flagged this as highly suspicious, her years of experience telling her that such coincidences simply didn't happen in legitimate missing persons cases. The camera had functioned flawlessly for 18 months without any technical issues whatsoever. It was maintained under a comprehensive city service contract with regular professional inspections and prompt repairs of any problems. The high-end digital equipment was designed to operate continuously for years without maintenance, and backup power systems prevented outages during storms or electrical problems. The footage in the critical 12-minute window had been automatically overwritten by the system's standard cycling protocol, which preserved storage space by deleting older recordings. However, a city technician reviewing the detailed electronic logs discovered something deeply troubling that made Detective Chen's suspicion seem justified. Manual override. Local access authorized at 3:09 p.m. Someone with technical knowledge and the proper equipment had deliberately disabled the camera from inside the junction control box using a master key, timing the shutdown to coincide precisely with Sophia's expected arrival at that location. 4 days after Sophia's disappearance, when the initial search efforts had been scaled back and the case was settling into the long-term investigation phase, a maintenance worker from Willow Creek Elementary named Dennis Walsh approached Detective Chun with information he hadn't initially considered significant enough to report. Dennis was in his late 50s, a quiet man who had worked at the school for over a decade and was known for his meticulous attention to detail and his genuine concern for student safety. I honestly didn't think it mattered at the time, he admitted sheepishly, wringing his work cap in his weathered hands as he sat across from Detective Chun in the school's main office. You see so many cars during pickup and drop-off times, and parents sometimes arrive early and wait. I figure it was just someone's dad or uncle waiting to surprise a kid. Dennis described a dark blue sedan, possibly a Ford or Chevrolet from the mid-1990s, that had been parked across from the school near the public bus stop on 4 separate Thursdays over the past month. The vehicle consistently appeared around 3 p.m., just before the dismissal bell, and was positioned to provide a clear view of the main entrance and the sidewalks where students walked. Initially, the car appeared to be unoccupied, with tinted windows that made it difficult to see inside clearly. But during the week preceding Sophia's vanishing, Dennis had observed someone sitting in the driver's seat. Couldn't make out facial features because of the angle and the window tinting, just the outline of a person's head and shoulders. Appeared to be male based on the size and posture. Tall, extremely thin, completely motionless like a statue. Most people fidget when they're waiting, check their phone, adjust a radio, look around. This person sat perfectly still, but I swear I saw him look up sharply when the dismissal bell rang, like he was paying very close attention to something specific. Dennis had never reported his observations because he didn't want to create unnecessary alarm in the community or be seen as paranoid. School safety was always a concern, but Cedar Falls had never experienced any serious threats, and he assumed the car belonged to a legitimate parent or guardian. In hindsight, he deeply regretted not trusting his instincts and reporting the suspicious vehicle to school administrators or local police. When Detective Chun pressed him for additional details about the vehicle, Dennis mentioned something peculiar that made her pulse quicken. There was a decal on the rear window, weathered and faded like it had been there for years. Circular in shape, looked like some kind of old institutional emblem with text that might have been Latin. I noticed it because it seemed out of place on such an ordinary car, like something you'd see on a professor's vehicle or maybe a private school faculty member's car. Detective Chen's expression changed instantly, her professional mask slipping for just a moment as recognition flashed across her features. That identical symbol had surfaced once before in a case from 7 years earlier, a case involving another missing child, a case that had never been solved, a case that had haunted her throughout her career. Detective Laura Chun had encountered that distinctive symbol during her previous assignment in a neighboring county, before her transfer to the Cedar Falls jurisdiction. The memory came flooding back with perfect clarity. A faded circular emblem containing 4 letters arranged in a ring, with the partially obscured letter 6 still visible despite weathering and age. The symbol had matched a marking discovered on the back windshield of a vehicle described in a 1995 case from the neighboring town of Riverside Heights, where 9-year-old Marcus Thompson had also vanished while walking home from his elementary school on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus Thompson's disappearance had been devastatingly similar to Sophia's case. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, no clear motive, and no viable suspects. The boy had simply vanished somewhere between the school gates and his family's front door, leaving behind a frantic mother and a community paralyzed by fear. No body had ever been recovered, no ransom demands had been made, no viable leads had developed despite months of intensive investigation. The suspicious vehicle reported at that scene had never been identified or located, despite extensive efforts by local and state law enforcement agencies. Marcus's mother, Patricia Thompson, had specifically mentioned a dark blue car bearing an unusual institutional seal to the investigating officers. She had seen it parked near the school on several occasions and had felt vaguely uncomfortable about its presence, though she couldn't articulate exactly why. At the time, investigators had dismissed the symbol as merely decorative, perhaps indicating alumni status at a university or membership in a professional organization. Now, 7 years later and 50 miles away, the same symbol had reappeared in connection with another missing child. Detective Chin realized with growing horror that what she had initially dismissed as coincidental might actually be something far more sinister. A signature, a calling card, a way for a predator to mark his territory or commemorate his crimes. The implications were staggering. If the same person was responsible for both disappearances, it meant they were dealing with a serial predator who had been operating undetected for at least 7 years, possibly longer. Detective Chin immediately contacted her former colleagues in Riverside Heights and requested that the Marcus Thompson case files be reopened for review. She also petitioned for access to all archived physical evidence, crime scene photographs, and witness statements from the original investigation. What she discovered when the files arrived made her hands tremble as she read through page after page of disturbing parallels. In Marcus Thompson's school notebook, discovered in his bedroom during the initial search, the final entry had been written in the boy's careful handwriting just days before his disappearance. He waits by the playground fence on Thursdays after school. He stands very still and never blinks. Mom says I shouldn't stare at strangers, but I think he's watching all of us. The entry was eerily similar to Sophia's drawings, suggesting that both children had been aware of surveillance before their disappearances. Both had been artistic, observant children who paid attention to details that adults might miss. Both had documented their observations in their own way, Marcus through written words, Sophia through detailed sketches. And both had vanished on Thursday afternoons while walking home from school. The following week brought a breakthrough that deepened the mystery considerably, while providing the first concrete evidence that Sophia might still be alive. A group of teenagers hiking in the forest preserve had discovered Sophia's mint green backpack, carefully concealed beneath thick underbrush near an abandoned storm drainage culvert nearly 3 miles from her established walking route. The location was completely isolated, accessible only by hiking trails that wound through dense woods far from any residential areas. The backpack's condition immediately caught Detective Chen's attention. It was completely dry and untouched by the recent rainfall that had soaked the surrounding area. The fabric showed no signs of weathering or exposure to the elements, and the zippers remained fully functional. The placement appeared deliberate rather than random, hidden carefully beneath vegetation in a way that suggested someone had taken time to conceal it properly, rather than simply discarding it in haste. Inside the backpack, investigators found several items that provided crucial insights into Sophia's disappearance. Her untouched lunch remained in its original packaging, suggesting that whatever had happened to her had occurred quickly before she had time to eat. Her pencil case, school supplies, and homework assignments were all present and accounted for. Most significantly, her sketch portfolio was there, but several pages had been carefully removed with precision, as if someone had selected specific drawings to take as souvenirs or evidence. At the very bottom of the backpack, wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture, investigators discovered something completely unexpected that changed the entire direction of the investigation. A folded map hand-drawn in pencil with a meticulous attention to detail that characterized all of Sophia's artwork. The map depicted a portion of Cedar Falls' forested perimeter, showing hiking trails, creek beds, and landmarks with remarkable accuracy for someone of Sophia's age. But most disturbing were the 7 red X's marked at various locations throughout the region, each positioned near elementary schools in different communities. The marks were connected by faint pencil lines, suggesting a planned route or systematic approach to the various locations. One mark was circled in thick pencil, Willow Creek Elementary, Sophia's own school. Near the circle mark, she had written the date March 14th, the day of her disappearance. At the edge of the paper, in one line written in Sophia's distinctive handwriting, was a message that made Detective Chen's blood run cold. He doesn't take everyone, only the ones who draw. The implications were staggering. Sophia had somehow known that she was being targeted, had understood that her artistic abilities made her a specific type of victim, and had attempted to document the patterns she had observed. The map suggested that she had been tracking the suspicious figure's activities across multiple locations, possibly trying to understand his methods or predict his next move. Detective Chen immediately contacted elementary schools near each of the marked locations to inquire about any suspicious activities, unusual visitors, or missing children. The results confirmed her worst fears. 3 of the marked schools had reported children going missing over the past 2 years, all under circumstances similar to Sophia's disappearance. 2 other schools had documented reports of suspicious vehicles matching the description of the dark blue sedan with the institutional emblem. Detective Chen visited Willow Creek Elementary the following morning to interview the art instructor, hoping to gain insight into Sophia's artistic activities and any interactions she might have had with strangers. Mrs. Rebecca Foster had taught art at the school for 15 years and knew Sophia well, describing her as one of the most talented and dedicated students she had ever encountered. Sophia had a natural gift for observation and detail, Mrs. Foster explained, her voice filled with genuine affection and concern. She could capture things in her drawings that most adults would miss. The way light fell across a building, the expression in a person's eyes, the mood of a landscape. It was really quite remarkable for someone her age. When Detective Chin inquired whether Sophia participated in any extracurricular clubs or after-school programs, Mrs. Foster's expression brightened slightly. Yes, she was one of our most devoted members of the Thursday Sketching Circle. It's a small group. Only 6 students who are passionate enough about art to stay after classes for an extra 30 minutes each week. We would take our supplies outside during good weather and draw whatever caught our attention. Trees, buildings, people walking by, birds, whatever inspired us. Detective Chun felt her heart sink as the implications became clear. The Thursday timing was not coincidental. Sophia and her fellow art students had been making themselves visible and vulnerable every week, setting up a predictable pattern that a predator could easily exploit. "Can you tell me about the other students in the group?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew part of the answer. Mrs. Foster's expression grew troubled as she consulted her records. "Well, that's been concerning me lately. We started the year with 6 regular participants, but the group has been shrinking. 2 of the students transferred unexpectedly within the past academic year. One family relocated out of state entirely in the middle of the school year, which was unusual. The other child..." She paused, checking her notes. Jamie Morrison was reported missing in 2000 from Lincoln Elementary in the next county over. That case was never solved, as far as I know. The name Morrison immediately caught Detective Chen's attention. It was too close to the alias Tom Morrison that had been used by the suspicious individual who had visited Sophia's home. The connection couldn't be coincidental. "That leaves 3 other students still enrolled at Willow Creek," Mrs. Foster continued. "Besides Sophia, there were Jessica Palmer and Tommy Rodriguez who participated regularly, and occasionally Sarah Chun, no relation to you, detective, would join us when her schedule allowed." Detective Chin requested contact information for the remaining students and their families, intending to interview each child carefully to determine what they might have observed during their Thursday afternoon art sessions. She was particularly interested in speaking with Jessica Palmer, Sophia's closest friend, who had been unusually quiet and withdrawn since the disappearance. The interview with Jessica Palmer took place at her family's home the following evening, with her parents present and a child psychologist observing to ensure the conversation didn't traumatize the already frightened girl. Jessica was clearly struggling with guilt and fear, believing somehow that she should have been able to prevent what happened to her best friend. During the careful, gentle questioning, Jessica revealed several crucial pieces of information. She confirmed that the Thursday Sketching Circle always met in the same location, a picnic area near the school's main entrance where they could sit at tables and have good natural light for their artwork. She also admitted that over the past month, she had noticed a man watching them from across the street. "He wasn't doing anything bad," Jessica insisted, her young voice defensive. "He just stood by the trees and watched us draw. Sometimes he would smile and wave if we looked over at him. Sophia said he seemed nice, like maybe he was an artist too and was interested in our work." The revelation that Sophia had been having direct conversations with her eventual abductor was devastating to everyone involved in the case. It meant that the predator had been grooming her systematically, building trust and rapport while simultaneously threatening her to ensure her silence. The manipulation was sophisticated and calculated, suggesting someone with experience in child psychology and predatory behavior. Detective Chin immediately requested a comprehensive database analysis of missing children cases, specifying parameters that she hoped would reveal the full scope of what they were dealing with. She requested information on all children aged 8 through 13 who had disappeared in western Oregon and surrounding states between 1993 and 2003, with particular attention to cases involving artistic or academically gifted children. The results that came back from the state and federal databases were absolutely chilling and confirmed Detective Chen's worst fears about the magnitude of the crimes they were investigating. 11 separate disappearances had occurred within a 100-mile radius of Cedar Falls, all sharing remarkably similar characteristics that suggested the work of a single, highly organized predator. In every single case, No witnesses had been present at the time of the disappearance. All incidents had occurred between 3 o'clock and 3:30 p.m. on Thursday afternoons, suggesting that the perpetrator had chosen that specific time window for operational reasons, perhaps because it coincided with school dismissal times when children were walking home alone, or because Thursday afternoon traffic patterns provided optimal opportunities for abduction. Every victim had been described by family members and teachers as quiet, artistic, and highly observant, children who noticed details that others missed, who expressed themselves through creative activities, and who demonstrated above-average intelligence and sensitivity. These characteristics suggested that the predator was specifically targeting children with certain personality traits and abilities, rather than selecting victims randomly. Most disturbing of all, each case had included at least one unusual drawing or artistic work discovered after the disappearance, often initially dismissed by family members or investigating authorities as unrelated to the crime. Parents and teachers had assumed these works were products of childish imagination or artistic experimentation, not realizing they might be documentary evidence of surveillance and grooming. In 4 of those drawings, detectives could now identify a common element that had been overlooked in the original investigations. A tall man without facial features, sometimes wearing a long coat, sometimes positioned near trees or school buildings, consistently described in the children's notes as watching and waiting. The artistic styles vary depending on each child's skill level and preferred medium, but the subject matter was remarkably consistent. Detective Chen requested copies of all the artwork from the various jurisdictions and spread them across the conference table in the police station. When viewed together, they told a terrifying story of systematic stalking and predation. The children had been documenting their own surveillance, creating an inadvertent record of a predator's activities across multiple years and multiple locations. Even more disturbing was the discovery that in every single case, the victim had participated in some form of art-based program, competition, or special instruction shortly before their disappearance. The predator wasn't simply opportunistic. He was specifically seeking out children who had demonstrated artistic talent and were participating in activities that made them visible to the community. Detective Chun constructed a detailed timeline using pushpins and colored string on a large map mounted on the conference room wall. When she stepped back to view the complete picture, a disturbing pattern emerged, a clear path moving systematically from community to community, roughly traveling south to north over a 12-year period. The progression showed careful planning and patience, with the predator allowing significant time to pass between incidents in the same area to avoid detection. Whoever was responsible wasn't acting impulsively or opportunistically. He was tracking potential victims across wide geographic areas, selecting specific targets based on careful observation and research, hunting methodically with the patience of someone who viewed his activities as a long-term project rather than crimes of passion. Most terrifyingly, the pattern suggested he was still active somewhere in a region, possibly already identifying and grooming his next victim. Carmen Martinez, Sophia's mother, had maintained a small visitor logbook beside her front door for several years, a habit developed during her work as a physical therapist who frequently worked from her home office and occasionally accepted deliveries for elderly neighbors who weren't available during business hours. The leather-bound book contained detailed entries about anyone who came to the house when she wasn't expecting them, including the date, time, name, and purpose of the visit. Detective Chin carefully reviewed each entry going back 6 months, looking for any unusual patterns or suspicious individuals who might have been gathering information about the family's routines. Most entries were routine: postal deliveries, utility meter readings, neighbors asking for favors, solicitors selling various products or services. But one entry made her stop cold and reread the information several times. March 6, 2002, Tom Morrison, utility service check, water department, she read aloud. The date was exactly 8 days before Sophia's disappearance, and the name Morrison matched the alias that had appeared in connection with other missing children cases. Carmen remembered the encounter vividly when Detective Chin questioned her about it. He seemed polite enough at first, very professional in his appearance and manner. He was wearing a standard utility company uniform with a badge and clipboard, everything you'd expect from a legitimate service worker. He said he needed to inspect the exterior meter connections and check for potential leaks or pressure issues in the neighborhood. Did he ask to come inside the house? Detective Chin inquired, making detailed notes about every aspect of the encounter. No, he said it was just an external inspection, but he did ask several questions that seemed odd at the time, Carmen replied, her expression growing troubled as she recalled the conversation. He asked about our family schedule, when people were usually home, whether we had any children. I told him that Sophia wasn't home from school yet, and that's when his demeanor changed slightly. Carmen paused, clearly disturbed by the memory. He smiled in a way that made me uncomfortable and said, "She's remarkably creative and talented, isn't she?" That really bothered me because I couldn't understand how he could possibly know anything about my daughter's abilities or interests. I asked him directly how he knew that, and he just said, "It shows in everything she does. You must be very proud of her artistic gifts." Then he quickly finished his work and left. Detective Chen's investigation revealed that the municipal water department had no employee named Tom Morrison and no service appointment scheduled for that date or address. The identification badge he had displayed, while convincing at first glance, was expertly forged using materials and techniques that suggested professional knowledge of document creation. Even more disturbing, that same alias, Tom Morrison, had appeared on visitor sign-in sheets for school art exhibitions and competitions at 6 different elementary schools over a 15-year period, always within weeks of a student's disappearance. The pattern revealed a predator who conducted extensive research on his potential victims, learning about their family situations, daily routines, artistic abilities, and personal interests before making contact. The home visits allowed him to assess security measures, determine when children would be alone or vulnerable, and gather psychological intelligence that could be used during the grooming process. On the 9th day following Sophia's disappearance, crime laboratory analysts returned a crucial piece of physical evidence to Detective Chen that would ultimately lead to the breakthrough in the case. During the forensic examination of Sophia's lavender sweater, which had been found in her backpack, technicians had discovered a loose thread caught inside the collar lining that didn't match the garment's original fabric composition. The thread was charcoal gray in color, slightly oily to the touch, and embedded with microscopic particles that required specialized analysis to identify. Under electron microscopy, the particles proved to be iron oxide and limestone dust, an unusual combination that suggested contact with very specific environmental conditions. Even more intriguing, embedded within the fabric fibers were fragments of black paint that appeared chipped and aged, showing signs of weathering and industrial use. The paint composition analysis revealed materials consistent with industrial applications used in pre-1970s municipal infrastructure projects like subway tunnels, storm drainage systems, or underground maintenance access points. The specific chemical signature matched paints and protective coatings that had been commonly used in public works projects during the 1960s but had been discontinued due to environmental and health concerns. Detective Chen realized that this physical evidence might point toward a specific location where Sophia had been held, somewhere with old industrial infrastructure that matched the material composition found on her clothing. She decided to retrace the 7-block route once more, this time examining every detail with fresh perspective and focusing on any locations that might contain underground access points or maintenance facilities. Just beyond Maple Ridge Boulevard, concealed behind overgrown vegetation that hadn't been properly maintained in years, she discovered something that made her pulse quicken and her training kick into high gear, a sealed service access hatch, heavily rusted and nearly invisible beneath twisted vines and accumulated debris. The metal cover bore no identifying signage or warning labels, and there was no security lock, just a heavy iron ring bolted to the center of the corroded surface. Detective Chun immediately radioed for backup support and requested that the city engineering department send someone to provide information about the underground infrastructure in that area. While waiting for assistance, she carefully documented the scene with photographs and measurements, noting that the vegetation around the hatch had been disturbed recently despite the overall appearance of abandonment. When backup units arrived along with the city engineer, they carefully opened the hatch using appropriate safety equipment and procedures. What they found beneath the surface changed the entire direction of the investigation and confirmed Detective Chen's worst fears about what had happened to Sophia Martinez. The hatch provided access to a narrow concrete shaft that descended approximately 15 feet into complete darkness. The shaft was part of an old storm drainage system that had been constructed in the 1960s, but had been decommissioned decades earlier due to structural problems and changes in city planning. According to the engineer's records, the system should have been completely sealed and filled with concrete to prevent unauthorized access. Inside the underground space, they discovered evidence of recent human activity that contradicted the official decommissioning records. Abandoned maintenance equipment showed signs of recent use, including battery-powered work lights that still held partial charges. Broken utility fixtures had been repaired with modern materials. Decades-old graffiti from the 1980s had been painted over in some areas, while new markings had been added in others. Near the far wall of the main chamber, they found a stack of sketchbooks and loose papers that made Detective Chen's heart race with hope and dread simultaneously. Most of the books were blank, their pages yellow with age and moisture, but one clearly bore a name that connected this discovery to the broader pattern of disappearances. Marcus Thompson, grade 4, Riverside Heights Elementary, the boy who had vanished 7 years earlier. Marcus's sketchbook contained dozens of drawings that mirrored Sophia's artistic documentation of surveillance and threat. Page after page showed the same faceless figure in various locations, always watching, always waiting. The final entries in the book showed crude maps of underground tunnels and chambers, suggesting that Marcus had been held in the same location where his possessions were now being discovered. Sophia's own sketch portfolio wasn't among those recovered from the underground chamber, which meant that either she still had it with her or her captor had kept it for reasons that Detective Chen didn't want to contemplate. However, one torn page lay separated from the others, and its contents provided the first concrete evidence that Sophia might still be alive. The page depicted a steel door standing partially open, rendered with a careful attention to architectural detail that characterized Sophia's artistic style. Beyond the doorway, a tunnel stretched into darkness, with rough stone walls and what appeared to be utility pipes running along the ceiling. At the tunnel's end, barely visible but clearly intentional, stood a tiny figure with the characteristic blank face that had appeared in so many of the children's drawings. The figure extended one hand forward in what could have been interpreted as either a welcoming gesture or a threatening command. In that outstretched hand, clearly drawn with precise pencil strokes, was a key. Beneath the entire image, written in block letters that showed signs of stress and urgency, was a message that gave everyone involved in the investigation a surge of desperate hope. He says the ones who see too much must come with him to the dark place. But I drew the way back so someone could find me. The page was signed with initials that made Detective Chen's hand shake as she held the evidence. SM, Sophia Martinez had been in this underground location. She had been alive long enough to create detailed artwork documenting her surroundings. And if she had managed to leave behind this crucial piece of evidence, she might still be alive somewhere deeper in the tunnel system. After discovering the underground access point in Sophia's signed sketch page, authorities immediately secured the entire area with police tape and summoned specialized urban search and rescue teams with experience in confined space operations. The Cedar Falls Fire Department's Technical Rescue Unit arrived with equipment designed for underground emergencies, including gas detectors to check for dangerous atmospheric conditions, specialized breathing apparatus, and communication systems that could function in subterranean environments. Remote-controlled drones equipped with high-definition cameras and powerful LED lights were deployed into the shaft to assess the underground conditions before risking human lives in what could be a dangerous and unstable environment. The initial reconnaissance revealed a complex network of tunnels and chambers that extended far beyond what city records indicated should exist in that location. Most of the tunnel system was obstructed by collapsed debris from decades of neglect, including broken water pipes that had leaked and were frozen multiple times, loose soil that had shifted and settled, and sections of corroded steel reinforcement bars that had failed structurally. However, between the electronic static and radio interference caused by the underground environment, the drone operators detected something that made everyone freeze in concentration, a faint rhythmic noise resembling metal striking concrete in a slow, deliberate pattern. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. The sound repeated with mechanical precision, clearly audible through the drone's sensitive audio equipment. Detective Chen had the audio recording immediately transmitted to the police station's technical services unit for filtering and enhancement. When the background noise was removed and the signal was amplified, the pattern became unmistakably clear. The sound repeated every 19 seconds with absolute consistency, not the random noise of settling debris or water pressure fluctuations, not the mechanical sounds of aging infrastructure, but deliberate human communication. The sound originated from beyond the block section of tunnel, approximately 90 feet underground, according to the drone's range-finding equipment. Engineers examining the structural plans estimated that portion of the network had been decommissioned in 1981 following severe flooding that had damaged the pumping systems and a budget dispute between the city and the contractor responsible for maintenance. The affected areas had never been properly documented or digitally mapped, existing only in paper records that had been stored in various municipal offices. Detective Chin suddenly remembered something that Carmen Martinez had mentioned during one of their conversations the night her daughter disappeared, a small detail that hadn't seemed important at the time, but now took on crucial significance. "Sophia loves puzzles and codes," Carmen had said, "ever since she was little. She's been fascinated by secret messages and hidden meanings. She learned Morse code from a library book last summer and used to tap messages on her bedroom wall when she was supposed to be sleeping. She would tap out her name or spell words, or sometimes just tap random patterns when she felt anxious or scared." The rescue team immediately forwarded the audio, recording to a military communications specialist who had decades of experience with Morse code and similar signaling systems. His translation was simple but profound, confirming everyone's desperate hopes while simultaneously increasing the urgency of the rescue operation. MOMHRE. The rhythmic tapping confirmed what everyone had been praying for, but hardly dared to believe. Sophia Martinez was alive somewhere beyond the debris field, trapped in an unmapped section of the abandoned utility tunnel system. For 10 days, an 11-year-old girl had survived in complete darkness underground, without adequate food and with minimal air circulation. The fact that she had maintained the mental clarity and physical strength to send coded messages suggested remarkable resilience, but also indicated that time was running out. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with resources flowing in from multiple agencies and jurisdictions. A rapid excavation team from the State Emergency Management Office arrived before dawn, bringing specialized equipment designed for urban disaster response and confined space rescue operations. Massive diesel generators roared to life throughout the night, providing power for industrial floodlights that turned the wooded area into a 24-hour construction zone. The bright illumination pierced through the tree canopy, visible from miles away and drawing concerned residents who gathered at police barriers to watch the rescue efforts. Firefighters, structural engineers, and tactical medical personnel surrounded the service hatch, establishing a command post with communication systems, medical equipment, and coordination centers for the various specialized teams. They worked in carefully organized rotating 4-hour shifts to prevent fatigue and maintain peak performance throughout the extended operation. Every 6 feet of progress, they paused their excavation work to listen for the tapping signals, ensuring that Sophia was still alive and conscious. The Morse code signal persisted with remarkable consistency to the first 13 hours of the rescue operation, providing regular confirmation that Sophia remained aware and responsive despite her ordeal. The rescue teams had established a simple communication protocol, tapping response messages that let her know help was coming, and encouraging her to conserve her strength while maintaining hope. Then at hour 13, the signal stopped completely. The sudden silence sent waves of panic through the rescue operation, with everyone fearing that they had lost their connection to Sophia just when salvation seemed within reach. Emergency medical personnel standing by prepared for the possibility that they might be recovering a body instead of conducting a rescue, while the excavation teams worked with renewed desperate urgency to reach the source of the signals before it was too late. At 4:17 a.m., after nearly 15 hours of continuous excavation work, the rescue teams encountered an unexpected obstacle that wasn't indicated in any official city planning documents or engineering surveys. They had broken to the natural debris field and reached what should have been clear tunnel space, but instead found a secondary barrier of reinforced brick construction that appeared to have been added years after the original infrastructure was built. The brickwork was professional quality, laid with precision, and sealed with modern mortar that showed this wasn't part of the original 1960s construction project. Someone with construction skills and intimate knowledge of the tunnel system had built this wall deliberately, creating a hidden chamber beyond the officially decommissioned areas. The implications were terrifying. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, but a carefully planned and prepared operation that had taken years to set up. Using jackhammers and specialized demolition tools, the rescue teams carefully broke through the brick barrier while monitoring for any signs of structural collapse that could endanger both the rescuers and their target. When they finally created an opening large enough to pass through, they discovered a chamber that was clearly not natural, not accidental, and not part of any municipal infrastructure project. The space had been deliberately constructed as a makeshift underground prison, designed to hold victims for extended periods. Inside, they found evidence of long-term habitation. A crude mattress created from old blankets and salvaged materials, numerous empty water bottles that suggested someone had been providing minimal sustenance to captives, a small flashlight with batteries that had died days earlier, and covering every available surface from floor to ceiling, dozens of sketches created with charcoal and pencil. The artwork covering the walls told a horrifying story of captivity and fear, but also of remarkable courage and determination. These were Sophia's artistic works, created during her imprisonment. Figures moving through dark tunnels, technical drawings of doors and locks with no handles or visible opening mechanisms, maps of underground spaces that showed incredible attention to detail and spatial awareness, and repeatedly, obsessively, the image of the man with no face who had taken her from the world above. In the far corner of the chamber, covered in dust and debris, barely breathing but unmistakably alive, lay Sophia Martinez. The actual rescue was conducted with extraordinary care and medical precision, as Sophia's condition was critical after 10 days of captivity in harsh underground conditions. Emergency medical technicians worked quickly but gently to assess her vital signs, establish for fluid replacement for severe dehydration, and prepare her for transport to the regional trauma center. Despite her physical condition, she remained conscious and alert, her eyes following the rescue workers' movements with an intelligence and awareness that amazed everyone present. Sophia was immediately transported by ambulance to Cedar Falls Regional Medical Center, where a specialized pediatric emergency team was standing by to address the complex medical issues associated with prolonged captivity and deprivation. She was severely dehydrated from limited water access, significantly malnourished from minimal food intake, and suffering from exposure-related injuries, but her vital signs were stable and her prognosis was remarkably positive considering the circumstances. For 48 hours after her rescue, Sophia didn't speak a single word. The medical team had prepared Carmen and the other adults for the possibility that psychological trauma might prevent communication for weeks or even months, given the severity of what she had endured. When she finally found her voice on the third day of her hospitalization, her first whispered word was "Mom," spoken with a clarity and emotion that brought tears to everyone present. Carmen never left her daughter's bedside during the entire hospitalization, sleeping in a chair beside the bed and maintaining constant physical contact to reassure Sophia that she was safe and loved. The reunion between mother and daughter was intensely emotional, but also marked by Sophia's remarkable composure and strength, suggesting that her artistic nature and observational skills had somehow helped her maintain psychological stability during her captivity. When Sophia finally felt ready to discuss her experience, she didn't cry or show signs of panic as the psychologist had expected. Instead, she whispered in a voice barely audible to the adults gathered around her bed. "He said I had to stay underground with him because I could see things that other people couldn't see. He said the others stayed there too, and that someday we would all be together in his collection." Her description of her captor was chilling in its detail and consistency with the evidence that had been gathered. Tall and unnaturally thin, with a distinctive smell of metal and mold that seemed to permeate his clothing and skin. He never revealed his face to his captives, speaking to them only through ventilation pipes and communication systems that allowed him to maintain control while remaining hidden. Most terrifyingly, he knew intimate details about Sophia's life, including her full name, her school activities, her artistic interests, and her family situation. He said if I told anyone what happened underground, he would draw me next, Sophia whispered, the words carrying implications that made everyone listening understand psychological manipulation and threats that had been used to control her during captivity. 3 days after Sophia's miraculous rescue, when she was medically stable and beginning to process her experience with the help of specialized trauma counselors, investigators returned to the underground chamber for comprehensive forensic analysis. The crime scene team worked methodically to document every detail of the makeshift prison, photograph all the artwork and evidence, and search for any clues that might lead to the identification and capture the perpetrator. Behind a rusty utility panel that had been painted to blend with the surrounding wall, they discovered a sealed metal archive container that had been carefully hidden and protected from moisture and deterioration. The container was locked with a combination mechanism, but X-ray analysis revealed contents that made the investigation team's hearts race with anticipation and dread. Inside the archive container, investigators found several categories of evidence that painted a horrifying picture of systematic predation spanning more than a decade. Old-school identification cards, faded but still readable, belonged to children who had disappeared between 1993 and 2004 from various communities throughout the region. Each card had been carefully preserved in plastic sleeves, with handwritten notes on attached index cards describing the child's artistic abilities, personality traits, and circumstances of abduction. Pages had been carefully torn from various sketchbooks and art portfolios, presumably taken as souvenirs from each victim. The pages showed a range of artistic styles and skill levels, but all depicted similar themes. Figures watching from shadows, maps of familiar locations, and increasingly desperate attempts to document and understand their situations. A small journal bound in leather and filled with meticulous handwriting provided the most disturbing insights into the perpetrator's mindset and methods. The entries were dated over several years, written in block letters that showed careful control and planning. Reading the journal was like looking into the mind of someone who viewed children not as human beings, but as collectible objects to be acquired, cataloged, and preserved. One entry, dated April 2000, described the psychological techniques used to control victims. She cried constantly on the second day underground. He doesn't tolerate crying or emotional displays. He shuts off the air circulation when they scream or make too much noise. But the girl who drew bird pictures, she survived the longest because she understood the rules and adapted to the environment. No author was identified in the journal entries, but forensic handwriting analysis matched the writing to partial samples that had been collected in Marcus Thompson's missing person file 7 years earlier. The implications were staggering. The same person who had taken Marcus had been documenting his crime for years, keeping detailed records of his victims' responses, survival strategies, and ultimate fates. One page was addressed directly to Morrison, the alias that had been used by the suspicious individual observed outside Sophia's school and had appeared in connection with multiple disappearances. The entry read like instructions or recommendations for future operations. The artistic ones always leave evidence of observation before the collection process. Monitor their artwork for signs of awareness. The ones who draw the figure are ready for collection. The ones who ask questions about the car are too curious and represent increased risk. The journal made it clear that whoever was responsible for these crimes wasn't simply abducting children impulsively. He was systematically documenting their psychological responses, developing refined techniques for victim selection and control, and treating the entire operation as a long-term research project with himself as the primary investigator. FBI behavioral profilers and forensic specialists joined the investigation once the contents of the archive container were scientifically verified and authenticated. The federal involvement brought additional resources and expertise, including access to national databases and analytical tools that could identify patterns across state lines and extended time periods. A complete forensic linguistics analysis of the journal revealed disturbing connections to multiple unsolved cases throughout the Pacific Northwest. The same phrases, sentence structures, and grammatical patterns appeared in witness statements and evidence from 4 different cold cases across 3 states. The consistency suggested a single author who had been active for over 15 years, possibly longer. The alias Morrison had been used to sign visitor logs at 8 different schools over a 12-year span, always within weeks of a student's disappearance. In each case, the individual had presented himself as a utility worker, maintenance contractor, or educational volunteer, using forged credentials that were sophisticated enough to pass casual inspection by school personnel. Most damning of all, Fingerprints recovered from the metal archive contain her matched partial prints that had been collected in 1994 outside Lincoln Elementary School in Salem, Oregon, where 10-year-old Amy Chun had vanished while walking home from an after-school art program. The connection confirmed that the same individual had been responsible for crimes spanning over a decade and hundreds of miles. Through database analysis and interagency cooperation, a new identity emerged from the investigation. Robert Allen Gray, a former maintenance contractor who had worked for multiple regional school districts between 1990 and 2005. Gray's work history provided him with legitimate access to school buildings, utility systems, and infrastructure that would have been essential for planning and executing the abductions. Gray had no documented criminal background prior to 2005, which explained why he had never appeared in suspect databases during previous investigations. His employment record showed a pattern of short-term contracts with different school districts, never staying in one location long enough to attract attention, but maintaining access to potential victims across a wide geographic area. Most disturbing was the discovery that Gray had no known residence or official address since 2005, meaning he had been living completely off the grid for years. Bank accounts, credit cards, employment records, and government benefits had all been abandoned, suggesting either death or a deliberate decision to disappear from legitimate society. But the most chilling revelation came from Gray's family history. His father, William Gray, had died in 1961 while employed by the Municipal Underground Infrastructure Maintenance Department, the exact same tunnel and drainage systems where Sophia had been imprisoned and where evidence of other victims had been discovered. City employment records showed that William Gray had worked on the original construction and maintenance of the underground networks throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, giving him intimate knowledge of access points, hidden chambers, and abandoned sections that weren't documented in official plans. The realization hit Detective Chun like a physical blow. This wasn't a random crime of opportunity committed by a disturbed individual. It was a methodical generational plan that had been passed down from father to son, with Robert Gray inheriting not just knowledge of the underground systems, but possibly a twisted philosophy about collecting and preserving gifted children. While Sophia recovered in a secure pediatric wing of the hospital, protected by round-the-clock security and receiving specialized trauma counseling, a child psychologist worked patiently to help her process her underground experience without re-traumatizing her or pushing her beyond her emotional capacity. Dr. Sarah Williams, who specialized in child victims of violent crimes, was struck by Sophia's remarkable composure and clarity as she recounted details of her captivity. Rather than the fragmented emotional testimonies typical of trauma victims, Sophia provided systematic, detailed accounts that demonstrated her artistic mind's ability to observe and document even under extreme stress. Sophia described every aspect of her imprisonment with the precision of someone who had been taking mental notes throughout the ordeal, the voice that spoke to her through ventilation systems, providing minimal food and water while issuing instructions and threats, the drawings that covered the walls of her prison, created by previous victims who had documented their own experiences, the bone-chilling cold that never let up, making sleep difficult and sapping her physical strength, the flickering lights powered by batteries that grew dimmer each day, and the distinctive smell of metal, dampness, and decay that permeated the underground environment. But then Sophia revealed something that stunned everyone present and completely changed investigators' understanding of the crimes. He didn't talk very much directly to me. He only told me when to sleep, when to eat the food he left, and when not to make noise that might be heard above ground. But there was another voice that asked lots of questions and seemed very interested in my drawings. Dr. Williams paused her note-taking, recognizing the significance of this revelation. Another voice? Can you tell me more about that, Sophia? Sophia nodded matter-of-factly, showing no signs of confusion or uncertainty that might be expected from a child who had endured such trauma. There was definitely another person down there with us. The voice was softer than the first man, younger sounding, and he spoke more often. He said they were creating something very special together, a book or a collection of some kind. He told me I would be chapter 23 in their project. No author was identified in the journal entries, but forensic handwriting analysis matched the writing to partial samples that had been collected in Marcus Thompson's missing person file 7 years earlier. The implications were staggering. The same person who had taken Marcus had been documenting his crimes for years, keeping detailed records of his victims' responses, survival strategies, and ultimate fates. One page was addressed directly to Morrison, the alias that had been used by the suspicious individual observed outside Sophia's school and had appeared in connection with multiple disappearances. The entry read like instructions or recommendations for future operations. The artistic ones always leave evidence of observation before the collection process. Monitor their artwork for signs of awareness. The ones who draw the figure are ready for collection. The ones who ask questions about the car are too curious and represent increased risk. The journal made it clear that whoever was responsible for these crimes wasn't simply abducting children impulsively. He was systematically documenting their psychological responses, developing refined techniques for victim selection and control, and treating the entire operation as a long-term research project with himself as the primary investigator. FBI behavioral profilers and forensic specialists joined the investigation once the contents of the archive container were scientifically verified and authenticated. The federal involvement brought additional resources and expertise, including access to national databases and analytical tools that could identify patterns across state lines and extended time periods. A complete forensic linguistics analysis of the journal revealed disturbing connections to multiple unsolved cases throughout the Pacific Northwest. The same phrases, sentence structures, and grammatical patterns appeared in witness statements and evidence from 4 different cold cases across 3 states. The consistency suggested a single author who had been active for over 15 years, possibly longer. The alias Morrison had been used to sign visitor logs at 8 different schools over a 12-year span, always within weeks of a student's disappearance. In each case, the individual had presented himself as a utility worker, maintenance contractor, or educational volunteer, using forged credentials that were sophisticated enough to pass casual inspection by school personnel. Most damning of all, fingerprints recovered from the metal archive container matched partial prints that had been collected in 1994 outside Lincoln Elementary School in Salem, Oregon, where 10-year-old Amy Chun had vanished while walking home from an after-school art program. The connection confirmed that the same individual had been responsible for crimes spanning over a decade and hundreds of miles. Through database analysis and interagency cooperation, a new identity emerged from the investigation. Robert Allen Gray, a former maintenance contractor who had worked for multiple regional school districts between 1990 and 2005. Gray's work history provided him with legitimate access to school buildings, utility systems, and infrastructure that would have been essential for planning and executing the abductions. Gray had no documented criminal background prior to 2005, which explained why he had never appeared in suspect databases during previous investigations. His employment record showed a pattern of short-term contracts with different school districts, never staying in one location long enough to attract attention, but maintaining access to potential victims across a wide geographic area. Most disturbing was the discovery that Gray had no known residence or official address since 2005, meaning he had been living completely off the grid for years. Bank accounts, credit cards, employment records, and government benefits had all been abandoned, suggesting either death or a deliberate decision to disappear from legitimate society. But the most chilling revelation came from Gray's family history. His father, William Gray, had died in 1961 while employed by the Municipal Underground Infrastructure Maintenance Department, the exact same tunnel and drainage systems where Sophia had been imprisoned and where evidence of other victims had been discovered. City employment records showed that William Gray had worked on the original construction and maintenance of the underground networks throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, giving him intimate knowledge of access points, hidden chambers, and abandoned sections that weren't documented in official plans. The realization hit Detective Chun like a physical blow. This wasn't a random crime of opportunity committed by a disturbed individual. It was a methodical generational plan that had been passed down from father to son, with Robert Gray inheriting not just knowledge of the underground systems, but possibly a twisted philosophy about collecting and preserving gifted children. While Sophia recovered in a secure pediatric wing of the hospital, protected by round-the-clock security and receiving specialized trauma counseling, a child psychologist worked patiently to help her process her underground experience without re-traumatizing her or pushing her beyond her emotional capacity. Dr. Sarah Williams, who specialized in child victims of violent crimes, was struck by Sophia's remarkable composure and clarity as she recounted details of her captivity. Rather than the fragmented emotional testimonies typical of trauma victims, Sophia provided systematic, detailed accounts that demonstrated her artistic mind's ability to observe and document even under extreme stress. Sophia described every aspect of her imprisonment with the precision of someone who had been taking mental notes throughout the ordeal, the voice that spoke to her through ventilation systems, providing minimal food and water while issuing instructions and threats, the drawings that covered the walls of her prison, created by previous victims who had documented their own experiences, the bone-chilling cold that never let up, making sleep difficult and sapping her physical strength, the flickering lights powered by batteries that grew dimmer each day, and the distinctive smell of metal, dampness, and decay that permeated the underground environment. But then Sophia revealed something that stunned everyone present and completely changed investigators' understanding of the crimes. He didn't talk very much directly to me. He only told me when to sleep, when to eat the food he left, and when not to make noise that might be heard above ground. But there was another voice that asked lots of questions and seemed very interested in my drawings. Dr. Williams paused her note-taking, recognizing the significance of this revelation. Another voice? Can you tell me more about that, Sophia? Sophia nodded matter-of-factly, showing no signs of confusion or uncertainty that might be expected from a child who had endured such trauma. There was definitely another person down there with us. The voice was softer than the first man, younger sounding, and he spoke more often. He said they were creating something very special together, a book or a collection of some kind. He told me I would be chapter 23 in their project. The implications were staggering. If there were two perpetrators involved, it explained how the operation had continued for so many years without detection, how victims had been controlled and monitored, and how the crime scenes had been managed with such precision and planning. Sophia created a sketch of the second man based on brief glimpses she had caught during her captivity. Different body type from the primary captor, shorter height and slighter build, wearing glasses that reflected the dim light, and consistently holding something in his hands that appeared to be a notebook or journal. In his grasp, clearly depicted with the attention to detail that characterized all of Sophia's artwork, was what appeared to be a leather-bound book where he recorded information about the victims. There had been no record of the second individual in any previous investigation, no witness statements describing multiple suspects, no evidence suggesting that the crimes involved more than one perpetrator. The discovery completely changed the scope and complexity of the case, requiring investigators to reconsider all previous evidence and witness statements. Until Detective Chin cross-referenced one of the identification cards found in the archive container through expanded national databases that included historical missing persons cases going back decades. The search revealed a connection that made everyone involved in the investigation stop and stare at the results in disbelief. The ID card belonged to Vincent Gray, age 12, who had been reported missing from his family's home in 1991, and presumed dead after extensive searches failed to locate any trace of him. Vincent Gray was Robert Allen Gray's younger brother, and his disappearance had occurred 2 years before any of the confirmed abductions that had been connected to Robert's activities. The family connection suggested a horrifying alternative explanation for Vincent's disappearance, rather than being another victim of random crime. He might have been recruited or coerced by his older brother into participating in the systematic abduction and imprisonment of other children. The psychological implications were staggering, suggesting that Robert Gray had begun his criminal career by victimizing his own family member and then manipulating that victim into becoming an accomplice. FBI agents immediately began systematically cross-referencing school employment records, custodial service contracts, maintenance vendor logs, and visitor sign-in sheets from all the locations where disappearances had occurred. The expanded search parameters now included any references to Vincent Gray or variations of that name that might have been used as aliases. The results confirmed investigators' worst fears about the scope and organization of the criminal operation. In 7 out of the 11 cases previously connected to Robert Gray's activities, employment records showed a Vincent Morrison listed as a temporary contractor, equipment inspector, or volunteer assistant. The pattern revealed that the brothers had been collaborating for over a decade, with Vincent using the Morrison alias to maintain a separate identity while participating in surveillance, planning, and possibly the actual abductions. The division of labor between the brothers became clear through analysis of their documented activities. Robert Gray, the older and more physically imposing brother, handled the intimidation, control, and physical aspects of managing captives. Vincent Gray, smaller and younger, focused on documentation, psychological manipulation, and the detailed record-keeping that had preserved evidence of their crimes for investigators to discover. They had been constructing something elaborate and deeply disturbed, a catalog of talent, as Sophia had described it, treating gifted children not as human beings, but as specimens to be collected, studied, and preserved. Each victim was assigned a chapter number in their twisted project, with Sophia intended to be Chapter 23 in a collection that had been growing for over a decade. The realization that Sophia had never been intended to escape alive was devastating to everyone involved in her rescue and recovery. Only 2 sets of footprints had been discovered in the tunnel system during the forensic investigation, one distinctly larger set that matched Robert Gray's estimated shoe size, and another smaller set that was more recent and belonged to Vincent Gray. Both perpetrators remained at large, their current whereabouts completely unknown despite intensive manhunts and federal warrants issued for their arrests. Robert Gray had not been seen or heard from since 2005, when he disappeared from all official records in legitimate society. Vincent Gray's trail was even colder, with no confirmed sightings or evidence of his activities since the discovery of the underground prison. But the journal found in the archive container concluded with a single, haunting line that suggested the Gray brothers viewed their criminal activities as an ongoing project rather than a series of completed crimes. The most gifted ones always draw their way out, but they never really escape the collection. The case of Sophia Martinez exposed a predatory network that had operated undetected for more than a decade across multiple jurisdictions, claiming at least 11 young victims whose artistic talents and observational skills had made them targets for collection and imprisonment. The sophisticated planning, patient execution, and generational knowledge that characterized the crimes represented one of the most disturbing child predation cases in Pacific Northwest history. Detective Chen continued working the case for 3 more years after Sophia's rescue, following leads across state lines, coordinating with federal agencies, and maintaining communication with law enforcement offices throughout the region. Despite extensive efforts and significant resources dedicated to capturing the Gray brothers, both men remain at large and presumably active. Security protocols were significantly increased at elementary schools throughout Oregon and surrounding states, particularly during Thursday afternoon dismissals when the Gray brothers had historically operated. Art teachers, counselors, and administrative staff received specialized training to recognize suspicious individuals showing unusual interest in student artwork, behavioral signs that might indicate a child was being groomed or threatened, and communication protocols for reporting concerns to law enforcement immediately. Community awareness programs educated parents about the specific risks faced by artistically gifted children, the importance of maintaining open communication about any adults who showed special interest in their children's abilities, and warning signs that might indicate surveillance or grooming activities. The programs were careful to balance safety awareness with maintaining children's ability to engage in normal creative activities and educational opportunities. Sophia Martinez made a remarkable recovery from her physical and psychological trauma, returning to school 6 months after her rescue with the support of specialized counselors and a carefully structured reintegration program. Her artistic abilities, rather than being diminished by her ordeal, seemed to be enhanced by her experience, and she began creating works that helped other trauma victims process their own experiences. Now a successful graphic designer and nationally recognized advocate for missing children, Sophia uses her artistic talents and personal experience to support law enforcement training programs, victim recovery services, and community education initiatives. Her foundation provides resources for families of missing children and funds research into predatory behavior patterns that help investigators identify and apprehend child abductors more effectively. But there are aspects of her experience that Sophia has never fully shared, memories that remain too painful or too dangerous to discuss publicly. She still draws regularly, finding peace and expression through her artwork, but she never sketches on Thursday afternoons. Some memories, she explains to those who ask, should remain buried in the darkness where they belong, while others should be transformed into light that helps protect other children from similar fates. The underground tunnels beneath Cedar Falls were permanently sealed with concrete and steel barriers designed to prevent any future access, but residents of the community still report strange sounds on quiet Thursday afternoons. The faint echo of tapping that seems to come from beneath the ground, as if someone in the darkness below is still trying to communicate with the world above. The Gray brothers remain on the FBI's most wanted list, with their photographs and aliases distributed to law enforcement agencies across North America. Their signature, the faded circular emblem with 6 letters that appeared on vehicles used in their crimes, serves as a warning to parents, educators, and community members throughout the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Training materials featuring this symbol help school personnel and law enforcement officers recognize potential threats before children become victims. Because somewhere in the shadows, the collectors are still watching, still waiting, still searching for the next gifted child who sees too much, draws too well, and fits the profile that has guided their selection process for over 2 decades. And every Thursday at 3:13 p.m., when school bells ring across communities throughout Oregon and surrounding states, people remember Sophia Martinez's courage and survival, and they look a little more carefully at the strangers who stand too still beneath the trees, watching children with eyes that never blink and faces that remain forever hidden in shadow. The investigation continues, with new leads and potential connections emerging regularly as cold cases are re-examined and modern forensic techniques are applied to old evidence. Someday, investigators believe, the Gray brothers will be captured and brought to justice. Until then, the legacy of their crime serves as a reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, that predators often target the most gifted and observant children, and that communities must remain vigilant to protect their most vulnerable members from those who would steal away innocence and transform bright young minds into chapters in collection that should never have been written.